Hello, everyone. Glad we can get this started now. Sorry for the delay. So today we're going to be covering PTSD Part 2. Before we get started, of course, we got to go over the disclaimer information. The first bit of information is just a kind of a reminder that this is considered a psychoeducational stream. So while this is happening, we cannot promise confidentiality, of course. However, we always encourage the audience to engage in the conversation. This is important because this is your opportunity to get whatever questions that you have out there, to put in your 2 cents. Obviously, we are talking about some pretty important information. PTSD. It's something that's been prevalent in the news, in newspapers, articles, ever since the war had started in Iraq and Afghanistan, and of course it goes much farther than that. However, again, going back to it, the disclaimer is we cannot guarantee confidentiality. If you are having issues, we do have stop members who are available who can pull you off to the side and talk to you about whatever issues that you have going on. They're always going to be standing by and here for you. So let's go ahead and get started. Let's start off with some introductions. So obviously we have a new guest here. We have a new host. This is Miss Eliza, and I'm proud to introduce her. She is my wife, and I'm going to go ahead and let her talk about her background and her credentials and education. Go ahead, hon.
I have a bachelor's in psychology. Just to start with, I've actually worked with individuals with learning disabilities, both children and adults. And I also have a bachelor's in special education. So that's more or less where I'm at, is working with individuals with learning disabilities, both in the school and also in the community.
All right, thank you. Um, so we're going to be moving on. So we got a recap of the last stream. I know it was several weeks ago, but I wanted to touch in on some of the stuff that we covered. First and foremost, PTSD, the history of it. That's what we kind of nailed. Was we talked about with Shane? We were talking about um, how this has been around for a very long time. In fact, the history goes as far back as the Spartans, the 300 Spartans. We talked a little bit about that. We talked about how during the Civil War it was a huge, huge issue. So we were trying to uh, reiterate to the audience that PTSD has been around and it's not going anywhere. And so it's important that we're finally investing resources with mental health to try and understand it a little bit better, but more importantly, treat it and spread the awareness on it. Um, okay, so uh, moving on, we have a lot to cover. In fact, I'm going to show you my notes. I actually took notes for this one. I don't know if I could show it on there. All that stuff right there is what the criteria is for PTSD. I'm not going to touch bases on every single one of those points, but what we want to do is talk about some of the main highlights of them. In fact, I urge you, if you are interested in learning more about PTSD, is to either get in touch with local mental health professionals or do some research online. So, with that being said, let's go ahead and jump right into it. What I want to talk about is first and foremost who can get PTSD. Now, believe it or not, a lot of folks think that it's just something that's exclusive for the military. However, that is not the case. Anyone can get PTSD. It's not just a single exclusive members only type club. When we are dealing with PTSD, we must remember that it is a normal reaction to an abnormal situation. And so when we take a look at it as a whole, it's a huge issue that affects more than just one group. Miss Eliza, what are your thoughts about this?
Well, I think that anybody can get it. The rates are certainly higher for certain people. in my neck of the woods, in my work, unfortunately, it kind of goes underdiagnosed quite a bit, and I think that a lot of it goes underdiagnosed. I think people just expect you to suck it up and deal with it. So, and I think that, building an awareness about PTSD and putting the word out there that this is real, and this is not one of those things that you just suck up and deal with. It's definitely something that you need to be aware of, that could use the intervention of some professionals for sure.
Absolutely. It looks like the audience is asking you to put your mic
Just
a little bit closer to you.
speak up.
Yeah.
Sorry, I'm a little soft spoken, and anybody who's ever played games with me before knows that. I
Yeah.
hardly ever talk. So, sorry. Is that better?
Well, I'm sure they'll let us know if it is or isn't.
Okay.
So, like I said, going back into it, it is not just exclusive for the military, and that's what we're going to be hitting here. So, before we even jump into that, we've got some PTSD facts that I want to share with you guys. Now, I don't like using PowerPoint a whole lot, but I think this is important enough where I'm going to go ahead and pull up. I have a couple of slides. It's just 3 slides. It won't bore you to death, but I want to make sure we cover the PTSD facts. All right, so let me go ahead and switch over to that. Okay, so here we have the PTSD facts, and I want to mention that this is coming straight from the Department of Veterans Affairs. Um, I'm just going to quickly go over all this information, a lot of numbers. So basically, 7 out of 8 um, people in the United States have a diagnosis of PTSD. 7 out of 8 out of every 100 people. So that turns out to be 8 million adults. That's a pretty large population. And for women, it's 10 out of every 100, and so that's about 10%. 4% of that is men. So the reason why I wanted to bring that up, because it's important to see that, again, reiterating, this is going to affect a much larger population than just veterans, than just the military population. It's much larger than that. Let me move on to the next slide. Oops. The next slide is another important area. So once again, like I said, PTSD is not exclusive to just war-related trauma. It is trauma in general. And one of those is the PTSD and MST. MST is military sexual trauma. And when we say that, it's basically it's kind of broken down into two categories. There is the actual assault, and then there is sexual harassment. And I notice right now that for whatever reason the slide is not pulling up on the stream, so I'm going to go ahead and just go ahead and roll with it. So basically, so 23 out of 100 women have been sexually assaulted, and of that, 55 out of 100 women have been harassed. So that's 38. So that's 55%. So 38 of those, all right. So for men, it's 38 out of 100 men have been harassed. However, and here's the interesting tidbit: half of all veterans who have been affected by MST are male. So what that is telling you, or what that tells me, is that there's a lot of underreporting that's going on, and in general with PTSD, it's underreported, and so that affects the percentages. So if
Well,
for
and isn't there some saying that's out there that men can't be raped or men can't be sexually traumatized at all? So I think there's a stereotype out there about that too. So that might be part of it.
Absolutely, and again, it's the stigmas. Men are supposed to be strong. Men are supposed to be they supposed to never turn down sex, but in fact, that's not true. So then again, a man who is in the military who has been sexually assaulted, either by a male, either by a female, doesn't matter. Assault is still assault. They don't feel comfortable reporting it through their chain of command. Um, Yes, exactly, Nightmare. Quite a few, I agree. And so these numbers are underreported. So again, PTSD does not affect just combat related. It is trauma related, and we're going to dive into that a little bit more. So Miss Eliza, so when you hear those words, like it's trauma related, what are some of the experiences that you have with your clients that you had?
Well, my clients might have been in a situation where they were institutionalized in the past. I've worked with a lot of adults who were actually institutionalized back before individuals with disabilities were given a chance to be a part of the community. So they went through a lot in the institutions. I do know that. Some of the children I've worked with have been through a lot as well, you know, with their families and situations with their disabilities that they might have encountered. Um, I'm not quite sure as far as, you know, how extreme some of them were, but there were definitely some issues going on there. And the things that makes it different with people with disabilities is that they have a hard time articulating when they've been through a traumatic or significant event. And unfortunately, that's the other issue with diagnosing them as well, is because they don't um, have the typical symptoms that a normal person would have. So when you go through the criteria, say with the DSM-4, it's a little different with people with disabilities. So unfortunately, it gets underdiagnosed quite a bit.
Absolutely, and so there's that barrier that of communication that's preventing access to services, is what I'm guessing. Is that a correct
Yes.
assumption?
Well, yes, but you know, as in your field, you know, there's everybody's different. What's good for the goose is not good for the gander. So when you have an individual who's displaying, whether it be anxiety or depression or whatever the case is, you have to know how to work with them. And oftentimes, I would write a behavior support plan to support them. And providing everybody does the same thing, then we should be able to curb the symptoms fairly well, hopefully.
Absolutely. So like, it just what it just tells me as a whole, and it's not just exclusive for anyone or anyone with disabilities, but more resources need to be invested into this issue of PTSD. How we can reach out to not just the service member who came home from war, but the child who has a learning disability or disabilities on their own, and they're trying to have a higher quality of life, because that's what it comes down to at the end of it. Okay, so let's change gears for a little bit, and I want to kind of cover some of the criteria of PTSD. So the DSM-5 has several sections to it, and again, we're not going to get to jumping into every single one of them, but we wanted to highlight some of the key ones. Now, as a counselor, I saw this every day. I saw individuals coming in, and they had no idea what was going on. They just knew something was affecting them. It was invading their day-to-day activities, and they were sick of it. Sometimes they came in crisis mode. Sometimes they came in under the threat of their spouse saying, "You need to go get help. If you don't go and get help right now, I'm out of here." And so they come in and they're saying, "We need to get something started. I can't do this on my own anymore. Can you please, we can just figure something out?" Let me quickly, before we get started, Kuro says, "Yes, my combat vet and I work on talking about it for years, and yet he still relies on calling hotlines and texting to bypass shame with masculinity." There you go. "And not wanting to burden me. Yes, more resources. I'm part of the Veterans Caregiver Support Group, and we have our own stuff to work through." That is, I appreciate you being a part of that. We need more people like that. Again, you know, I imagine you've expanded a lot of your awareness about PTSD and how it affects. And later on in the stream, Miss Eliza and I, we're going to cover just exactly how PTSD can have an effect on the family members. Uh, it's again, it's not just one person. It affects more than that. So I'm going to go over one of the first criteria. Um, Basically, the traumatic event is re-experienced. This is coming directly from the DSM. The first and foremost one is nightmares. Okay, everybody gets nightmares. However, what is specific with PTSD is that the nightmare is often related to the traumatic experience. Now, it doesn't have to be an exact carbon copy. There can be some generalization that happens with it. However, these nightmares are almost always going to be some sort of relatedness to it, like the war, or maybe the car crash. It might not be the exact same car that that person had driven in and got into a horrific car accident, but it's still a car, and there's still an accident, and it still has that negative impact that wakes them up. Um, so then we've got, of course, flashbacks. Flashbacks. This is interesting. So, and I'm gonna let Miss Eliza take over in a second here. But my experiences, whenever I do my intakes with my clients, people get concerned about saying, "Yeah, I get flashbacks," because they think that this could be a sign of even schizophrenia. And I always have to reassure my clients that says, "Look, man, flashbacks have nothing to do with schizophrenia or some kind of deeply issued mental health problem. Flashbacks is just another way of the brain trying to protect." Miss Eliza, go ahead. What are your thoughts on those two subjects? Do you have any?
Well, it's interesting because, these are all defense mechanisms that are all typical of what our brain does in order to help us through traumatic events. And this can also happen for animals, even out in the wild. So it doesn't even matter, the type of person you are. I mean, your chances are pretty low of having schizophrenia on top of it, but even a schizophrenic person has the same kind of symptoms as anybody else on those fronts with defense mechanisms.
Right, and again, and this boils down to defense mechanism. This is what your brain is trying to do to keep you one safe, first and foremost, and alive. And the brain is just going to overreact on all these different fronts because it constantly thinks that you're in distress, that you are there's a threat to you of getting attacked or something like that. So that kind of builds into the next area, the emotional or physical reactivity of after the exposure to the trauma. So let me give you kind of a quick example. Let's say, for example, um, this person was over at a nightclub, and the nightclub, when they left, they were sexually assaulted. So whenever they walk by a nightclub or an alleyway that has a resemblance to that traumatic experiences, they're going to have a physical reaction to it. They're going to say, "I don't want to go down that road. I don't want to go down that alleyway because it reminds me of the traumatic experiences." So there's that level of avoidance. And so again, what Miss Eliza was saying, it is how our brain protects ourselves, the defense mechanisms. I see it again.
Well, it's just classic conditioning at its finest.
Absolutely. And I saw it all the time again with my clients. They would say, "I don't go to busy I won't go down to a busy street. I stay away from highly populated uh, areas, like going to the market or going to a movie theater, anything like that. Anything that has a
A
remembrance of the
trigger.
trauma, a trigger." There you go. It's interesting in society. We hear that so often about triggers. This is truly what triggers is, of being triggered, is that it reminds them of the trauma. So another area that's really important to bring up is the inability to recall certain events of the trauma. Okay, so this is interesting. Again, protective factors, very protective factors that we've got. Um, let's say I've had clients who said, "I can't remember anything that happened after the event. I don't remember the next day. I don't remember who was with me." And this is, again, this is very, very common. Our brain is trying to suppress the memory. Miss Eliza, what are your thoughts are about suppression and memories and stuff like that?
Well, and definitely with people with learning disabilities, will have suppression, they'll have avoidance, they'll have all of those type of things when they're trying to avoid something. One of the things we do when we make a behavior support plan is we do a functional analysis to determine why the individual is manifesting certain behaviors in a certain way. And one of those is absolutely avoidance. And so, when you're trying to figure out, what the individual wants or is trying to get away from, you determine that when you're trying to help curb the behavior or assist the person in becoming more functional. So, by avoiding the behavior, they certainly avoid whatever trauma or stress that could possibly come from avoiding that particular event or occurrence that's going on that triggers them.
That's great. And Kiro, you bring up a really good example, and I appreciate you sharing that. You said yes, I stay away from freeways because of my car accidents. So that is a perfect example of avoidance, and that's the protective factor that our brain is doing to keep us safe. Um, and so the next part of it is decrease interest in activities and isolation. This is really important, and I want to explain why I want to spend a little bit more time on this. Okay, so we hear the words isolation, we hear the words social isolation, withdrawal. Um, a lot of service members and those who have been traumatized, those who have PTSD, they'll just stay holed up in their house. The house is the sanctuary. Your home is where it should be the safest place to be. And once we step foot outside those doors, then we increase our possibility of being harmed. And so a lot of people say it's just easier to stay home. Now, this is why I get so excited about social engagement, being connected, and what StackUp does. StackUp connects people. Now, sometimes it's done virtually, sometimes it's done through online video games, but they also have the uh, the real life component to it, and that's the stacks. Okay, so the stacks are there in local groups where people can get together and they can hang out, be engaged, and be connected. This is a very important thing. Is the social aspect. Humans in general are very social creatures, and when that component gets kind of left off to the side because of PTSD, we are missing out on a very critical element of life. Miss Eliza, what are your thoughts about that with social engagements and being connected?
Well, I think there's something to be said about being introverted. However, when you can't step out of your house, that kind of excludes you from the rest of society. We are we are creatures that really do need other human contact, and we need to be out there, and engaging in that. And that's definitely, if you're avoiding something, so you're not able to go out into public and function like a human being should, or do what you got to do, then you're definitely hindering things, and that's when it definitely becomes a problem for you, for sure.
Absolutely. And Nightmare, here we go. Out there in the chat room, he's a stack up lead there, over there in Puerto Rico. So if you are a guest right now watching this stream, I urge you to check out what stackup.org has available as terms of either online engagement or in real life social engagements. Get active. You know, that's the step, the first step towards reclaiming your life. Again, I've said it in before streams. We've got two ways. I have two ways that I approach things. Either we're surviving or we're thriving. And someone who's in the throes of PTSD and it's hitting them hard, they're often in survival mode. And it's really hard to break away from that. And that's what we're trying to do. That's the reason why Stack Up exists, because they're trying, one of the reasons why it exists, because it's trying as an organization to pull people away from that isolation and find that interest in your activities again. Because a lot of people would say it when I had clients. I said, "What did you like to do? What do you like to do for fun?" And they said, "Well, I used to like going fishing, or I used to like going to the beach, but I don't find enjoyment from doing that anymore." And we are trying to help them reclaim that. That's not going anywhere. So we need to help them get back into the swing of things, I guess, for lack of better words. Okay, so here's the next little tidbit, and we did talk about a little bit on the first PTSD stream, is hypervigilance. Um, when I take a look at each client and when we talk about it, usually in the first session, I'll ask them the very first question is, how much scanning and panning do you do? And they're like, what? I'm not I do this purposely because I don't want them to I want them to explore this further, I guess to say. And so I'll give them an example. I said, so okay, so if you're sitting down at a restaurant and you're with your significant other or you're with your family and friends, how much time are you spending looking for security flaws, looking for a way out, looking for a potential threat versus being engaged with the people that you're eating with. And that kind of hits them. They're like, whoa, that's true. I do that all the time. I can't even sit down for 10 minutes without looking at, all the people that are in the room to see if there's a threat there. And so that is the best way I help people understand what um, hypervigilance is. So, Miss Eliza, what are your thoughts about hypervigilance and all that?
Well, I know a lot of the people that I've worked with before have always kind of been on their guard and they might be a little overreactive, particularly individuals with autism. They can it's almost like they have their sensitivities turned up, the volume turned up all the way, and everything is just coming at them all at once. And so I kind of see this as kind of like the same thing where your sensitivities are heightened, you're sensitive to your surroundings and what's happening around you. So instead of focusing on the people you're with or the situation that's going on, you're more focused on all this other stuff and perceiving if there's a threat or guarding yourself and protecting yourself and having
Exactly.
fun.
Oh yeah. And Nightmare, you touch on a very important thing. You said in the chat. You also just like to watch people do their thing. It's pretty curious. And you're right. There's a very distinct difference between people watching, which I enjoy
People
doing.
watching.
Yeah, it's fun. I mean, I used to enjoy doing that all the time. Versus, I'm looking at every single face to make sure that they're not a threat. So the question kind of boils down to is how do we stop that? And there's many ways of doing that. Often, I would kind of joke with my clients. It says you just got to tell your brain to shut up, man. It's simple as that. Tell your brain, say, hey, I'm in a safe environment. I've already taken a look at everything. It's safe. Time to get re-engaged with who I'm sitting with,
Well, and
who I am.
with students, we give them fidget things. I mean, that's probably how the fidget spinner came about, is because we literally do give students something to preoccupy themselves, a different behavior or something else to focus on so that it automatically interrupts whatever that is. It's kind of like when you quit smoking. Some people might chew gum or eat sunflower seeds. You got to find something to replace that behavior with a better behavior to essentially have your brain rewire itself so that you can try to focus on other things or do something else to stop the bad behavior.
Absolutely. And hypervigilance, in a sense, I also talk about is that a lot of folks with PTSD are either focused on the past or focused on the future. And by that I mean they're thinking about the trauma, or they're thinking about that situation, or they're thinking about the what ifs. They're playing the what if game. What if that person that's inside the library with me? What if they might sexually assault me? What if that person who's walking past me? What if they might assault me? So what we try to focus on in my sessions with my clients is to be in the here and now. I'm sure a lot of people have heard that term quite often. The here and now is right here, right now. And it sounds kind of crazy, but we're trying to stop investing so much of your time worrying about something that you cannot predict. You cannot predict the future, and you can't change the past. So be in the here and now and enjoy what's happening or being connected with what's going on right in
Stop
front
and
of you.
smell the flowers.
There you go. Perfect. Absolutely. Stop and smell the flowers and check out your surroundings, you know, and see, take in the experience and not and being able to let go of that worry. That's the ultimate, I would say that's probably the ultimate feel, is to be able to be in the here and now and enjoy yourself. And so that kind of rolls into the next area is the heightened startled reaction. Okay, so I would like to ask the people who are watching this stream, what are your thoughts about, for example, if you live in America, the 4th of July? What are your thoughts about the fireworks and the explosions? If anybody wants to chime in on that, what do you think? What does it do to you? Or what does it do for you? Because a lot of,
Fourth of July.
say again, hon?
4th of July, we're talking fireworks in the sky. Uh, what else?
Yep. Kiro, you said we can't celebrate it. A lot of folks, a lot of at least veterans who are deployed and stuff like that that I've worked with, they can't stand the 4th of July. They love celebrating the independence part, but it reminds them so much of combat, or it reminds them of the IED that blew up on their convoy mission, and it just startles them. They're on hyper alert. They can't.
And they might have to have a few drinks, put a few drinks back in order to handle it. Ah, I just
Right. I've had veterans who had to put on sound canceling headphones so they don't have to hear the explosions. So if we have a startle reaction, that's a normal human element. It's again, it's our brain trying to protect us. But when it comes to PTSD, it has a much more harsher effect. So
Well, and speaking of time of year things, I think it's a good time to mention about the anniversary effect of PTSD and how certain behaviors might be more heightened during certain times of the year, depending on, say, like if you have a typical time of year when you normally have, those type of feelings, and that's a pattern. And in education and working with people with disabilities, that's definitely something I always look for, are patterns.
yes, anniversaries, and that's another thing that gets often overlooked. A couple of times I'll have veterans say, Matt, you know, for whatever reasons, this month has been really hard for me. And I said, all right, let's take a look at it and let's explore this a little bit more, and we'll find out that this kind of has a reoccurring situation every year. So I said, well, when were you deployed, or when did this traumatic event happen to you? And a lot of the times it happened right at the time when they're feeling and heightened of these issues. The nightmares, they get ramped up. The hypervigilance gets ramped up. The irritability, they're like ready to start smashing things because they're so angry. And they're all interconnected. And so we find out through exploration that they're in their anniversary window. And a lot of people don't recognize that. Now, PTSD, the symptoms are not constant. Oftentimes, the symptoms wax and wane. And so people, if they're not looking for it, they're just like, I don't know what's going on with me. But there's often an explanation for it. So let's take a look at what's saying here in the chat first. Ninja Cray says to the fireworks, I say the more the better, reminds me of blowing up shit overseas. You make a very valid point. It doesn't affect everyone. Not everyone has the same experiences. In fact, I used to say in my sessions, you can have 10 people in a room and they're going to have 10 different experiences. So what that means is that not everybody's going to react the same way. That's just the way it is. Nightmare says, I hate them, especially here since we live mixed with poor neighborhoods. There's always gunfire in my area when it comes to celebrations of the sort. Yes, I can see why that would absolutely give you that startled response. Kiro said, yes, anniversaries helps tie it all together, gives permission to feel a little bit more. Exactly. So one of the things I always challenge my clients to do is to experience these feelings, to understand the feelings. We don't want to suppress those. We want to ask the client or the person who's in that anniversary window, says, why are you feeling this way? Acknowledge it. And once you have finished acknowledging it, is it possible for you to move on and to be back in the here and now? So again, the anniversaries is a really good example of being in the past. Okay? That person is nowhere here in the here and now. They're all the way back to the time when that traumatic experience happened. And so I challenge them. I says, come back to us. Come back to the present. Take that weight off your shoulders if it's possible and see if you can be here with us in this room. It's not easy, and a lot of people have a very hard time doing it, but that's the challenge. We have to challenge ourselves to have that higher quality of life. Miss Eliza, you got any thoughts or anything?
Well, I just know that, when those happen, all of the symptoms all come back at the same time. And sometimes we do see that with patterns, with people with learning disabilities. certain times of day. In fact, that's something we actually look for when we're assessing the behavior and determining the frequency with which it happens. Which place does it happen more often? Is it just with certain people? It's just different for everybody.
Absolutely. Okay, so let's move on. This is another big area, and I invest a tremendous amount of time and resources in this. It's difficulties concentrating and sleeping. So, can you guys see the familiar pattern with this? If that person is has in heightened hypervigilance, heightened startled response, and they are not in the here and now, how well do you think they're going to be able to concentrate? I have veterans who are students, and they're like, Matt, I am just so lost in school. I said, well, do you have a hard time concentrating on the subject matter? They're like, yeah. And I says, well, have you thought about what is influencing your concentration? And they said, I'm usually just kind of thinking about what about my own safety of being in there. And so we would do things like using grounding techniques. I am a huge fan, and we'll probably have this in a later stream, how to ground a person to be in the here and now. And often we use a tactile a device, kind of like a totem, that they can stick in their pocket and use that to ground them, do some breathing techniques, and hopefully get back to the here and now and the present focus. It's kind of like a fidget spinner, like Miss
A
Eliza,
lucky charm.
a lucky
A
charm.
lucky charm.
Yeah, and so these student veterans will take this grounding technique, and they'll ground themselves when they feel that they're losing their concentration. The professors out there, they're doing their spiel, and they're like, I have no idea what this guy is talking about. I need to ground myself because I'm not even close to paying attention. Um, so again, it all ties in, including the sleeping. Sleep hygiene, that is a huge issue in the world today. I always hear about friends and family members and veterans alike, everybody, not everybody, but a lot of folks saying, I don't sleep well. I don't sleep well at all. And so we will take a look at their sleep hygiene. Sleep is very important for numerous reasons. We're not going to get into it right now. But I've seen veterans saying, I get maybe 2 hours, maybe 3 hours of sleep. I said, well, let's take a look at it. How much caffeine are you drinking before you go to sleep? Or, what are you doing before you go to bed? Here, take this assessment that I have, and let's take a look at the nuts and bolts of your sleeping habits, because that's a very important factor. So let's think about this. If you are constantly on guard, if you feel like you're not safe, how well are you going to fall asleep? And that's when the self medication might be coming in. The self medication could be anything. It could be drugs. It could be alcohol. They're doing these things to help them fall asleep, and it might work for a few years, but then after a while it doesn't work anymore, so they increase their consumption to try and get there, and it kind of creates this what I call a negative feedback loop. um, Ms. Eliza, how is it for you with sleep? I mean, did you ever see students who were falling asleep in class, anything like that?
Oh yeah, absolutely. And I had one student in particular who always had his head down, trying to sleep a lot. And unfortunately, um, kids don't get a lot of sleep, and they should be. I know my child, if he doesn't have any sleep, he's a wreck. And I always ask him, "How'd you sleep last night?" That's always part of our verbal exchange in the morning. How did you sleep? Because we kind of know, like, okay, I know today's going to either suck or not suck, depending on the amount of sleep you have.
Right, absolutely. And so what I like to do again, and Nightmare, you said it. I took the assessment. It's very cool. I do that sleep hygiene assessment, and sometimes all it takes is just a few small changes to help make a difference. You know, when a vet says that when they go to bed, their mind is just swarming with thoughts, I said, well, why aren't you experiencing these thoughts while you are in the present? You know, they save
I
them.
call that the night heebie jeebies.
There you go, the night heebie-jeebies. So if you have a day's worth of events and thoughts that you suppressed, and you're only experiencing them right before you go to bed, how well are you going to sleep? We can, and this is the reason why we're going to have a separate stream about sleep hygiene, because it is so important. And those who are affected by PTSD, they're going to be drinking maybe one or two energy drinks when they wake up or just to get through the day. And so it creates that, again, that negative feedback loop. So let's take a look at what we have here in the chat. Captain Yossarian says, I don't have PTSD, but my poor sleep hygiene puts me on edge. It changes my interactions with people at work, friends. I can't imagine how that magnifies paranoia and social anxiety for PTSD sufferers. Exactly. Yeah, you nailed it right there, Captain. It heightens everything. So when that person is getting poor sleep, everything else is going to respond accordingly. Um, yeah. Okay, so uh, let's move on because I want to make sure we have enough time to cover everything. I'm going to give it to you, Miss Eliza, to take off vicarious trauma. We're going to talk about vicarious trauma and what that means. When you hear those words, what does that mean to you, Miss Eliza?
Well, it means you're experiencing something through somebody else.
Exactly.
That's vicarious.
Right. It's kind of a
Yeah.
weird word. I enjoy that. I love that word vicarious. Just not for what it means, but just the word itself sounds cool. So to kind of expand on that, vicarious
Isn't that a
trauma.
Tool song?
Yeah, I love Tool. Um, okay, so what we mean by that in the world of psychology is that let's say you have a member of the family who was diagnosed with PTSD. Okay, that person is experiencing all the issues, the comorbidities, the flashbacks, the nightmares, the all that stuff, the hypervigilance, and because the family members are so close and they are constantly interacting and experiencing that family member, that trauma mitigates to that, not mitigates, but it migrates to that person. So that person who has a vicarious trauma didn't even have to be in trauma itself. So let's say the service member was hit with an IED on a convoy mission. That family member didn't even have to be there. They didn't have to be there, but they experienced the same issues that the service member did. That is vicarious trauma. And that's why it's a very real issue. It's called secondary PTSD. You won't see it in the DSM, but it is out there, and someone can get diagnosed with it. Is basically saying you basically have PTSD because the person that you share your home with or you have that relationship with has experienced this for so long, and you are
Mm-hmm.
so close to that person. Now you are dealing with PTSD itself. Uh, Miss Eliza, what are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think that most families are connected. You kind of know when somebody walks in the door if they have a dark cloud over their head and if they're not feeling well and you're sensitive to them, you love them, you want to know what you can do to help them feel better. And unfortunately, when you have a severe case of PTSD, there's really not a lot you can do about it. So it has a tendency to shroud over everybody else, like, oh no, dad's upset again, or something like that, and everybody just kind of hunkers down and sucks it up and goes about their own way. And then you have this crazy, crazy dynamic that happens with the family where certain kids have taken on certain roles, like you might have your scapegoat. I mean, these are all classical psychological family dynamic type of stuff that could happen in this family if one person kind of sets the balance off for everybody else.
Right, and what I would call them were the unspoken rules. And I would ask them that. I would ask the veteran who has a family. Said, so what are some of the unspoken rules? How would the family react towards you when you are experiencing an increase in that hypervigilance? And it would take them a while to think about it because they never thought about it. Basically, what I'm telling them is that when they see the parent reacting in a certain way, that child or that other family member will almost unconsciously respond in a certain way. So let's say, for example, the veteran is increased irritability. Okay, so the spouse will react in a way of trying to temper that person's anger and emotional outbursts, or let's say they will try to pull the children away from the veteran in order to keep them safe without even really saying anything. They just unconsciously do it. That's what we consider as being the unspoken rules of a family. Captain Yoss said it seems to generate a lot of friction and stresses the bonds between family members. Absolutely. You nailed it again. Basically, uh, I see this all the time with veterans who have family members, or they have a spouse, a significant other. I ask them, I says, "What is your relationship like? How much time do you spend engaged with your spouse, with your significant other? Because that's important. You know, even though you might be busy with work or maybe busy with school, are you able to sit down and have a conversation with your significant other and talk about these things? And that's the importance again of communications, and that's why we're going to cover that in later streams because it's so important to be able to sit down with your spouse and say, or your partner, and say, I'm having a hard time. I'm having a hard time dealing with these issues. I'm feeling this and I'm reacting like this. And I could really use your help. What are your thoughts on that with communications?
Well, you got to communicate. I mean, if you don't communicate, you know, nobody knows anything. So I guess, and then in terms of roles, there might be somebody else in the family that takes over that role of communication because, they it's kind of like a limb when you sprain your ankle or you break your leg. The rest of your body kind of overcompensates for it, and the family does that too.
Right, compensating for an issue. What we call in the world of psychology is the homeostasis of the family. Um, Basically, to give you the kind of the quick and skinny of it, and is basically uh, we've heard the term in terms of biology. The homeostasis is that line of content being the family members. Everything is going and humming along as it should be, either for good or for worse, better or for worse. Excuse me. And let's say the parent starts experiencing an uptick of issues. Well, that homeostasis is going to start is no longer a nice even line, but it's going to start jumping up and down like a wave, like a wave. And there'll be certain family members who are going to react to try to bring that homeostasis back. And so that again plays into the unspoken rules and again how PTSD affects not just one person, it doesn't. It never affects just one person, but it affects an entire family or it affects a group of friends, a social support group. You know, I want to take a moment here to talk about all the suicides that are happening. I just got finished reading that the CDC said that there's an increase of over 20% of suicides that are going on right now. And of course, we have the celebrity things that are going on. We have two very, I guess, popular celebrities who just recently killed themselves. And this all plays in together. Communications, your social support. Who can you rely on to talk to when you are feeling this way? You know, if you can't reach out to that person and say, hey, dude, I'm feeling this way, I'm feeling really depressed, you're left with very little options. And again, to go into it further, that's what like a program like the Stop Initiative is for. If you don't have that person that you can reach out and talk to, you have Stop Here, which is basically saying you come in, you got a forum for support. So if that member who's a part of Stack Up is having issues, they come in and they can talk to someone who's trained to help and trained to have that list to listen to your issues as far as what's going on and help you move past it. Again, suicide is a very big hot topic right now, just like PTSD, and I wanted to make sure that we talked about it. Um, let's see. Let's take a look at what's going on here in the chat room. We use Gottman interventions to connect and reconnect. Very good, very good. Gottman, he's the pro at that. Captain says you have to be willing to talk and just as importantly willing to listen. Yeah, that's a big difference. Uh, you listening is not just sitting there and being quiet. Listening takes an active participation on that person's part. to be able to truly take in what that person is saying. Um, Miss Eliza, what are your thoughts about that?
Well, I mean, if one person's talking and somebody's not listening, definitely not going to happen, obviously. So, find somebody else who will listen. There's always a different take on life that you can have. There's always, different things you can do. I think Jim Carrey was quoted as saying that, depression is your avatar's way of telling you that you want a different character or you need a character upgrade or something like that. So there's so many different ways you can have your life to be, and it doesn't have to be just a certain way. But you got to work towards that. You got to build your character.
Absolutely. And I've always been a firm believer that everybody has the potential to make positive change. It doesn't have to be the way it is forever. A lot of veterans will come in my office and they'll sit down in our sessions saying, "This is how it's going to have to be for the rest of my life." I says, "Well, do you want it to be that way, or do you want to change it?" I use something that's called a solution-focused brief therapy, where we invest a tremendous amount of our time of our sessions helping that veteran get to where they want to be. Everybody, wants a better life. Who comes in my doors, and they don't, but they just feel that they have lost, some hope as far as how to change it, and that's the reason why they come into counseling. They come into counseling to try and make that difference, to make that change, to help them get back on track. So that one veteran who used to enjoy fishing can go back and fish and be happy and be content and be in the here and now and have a healthy family unit, to have that communications, to be able to reach out to their significant other and say to them, hey, let's talk. You know, Gottman. I'm going to go back to Gottman because I'm a big fan of him. He would say that you need to spend a minimum of, I think it was 3 hours a week talking to your significant other. And I'm not talking about, hey, how was the day, or uh, how was your commute to work? No, we're talking about significant interactions. And Gottman was very, very okay. He used to be able to predict with over 90% accuracy of whether or not a relationship is going to work or it's not. The guy was pretty, for lack of a better words, shit hot when it came to predicting this stuff. And so we would ask that very same question: how much time are you spending with your spouse talking about whatever's going on? A very good indicator as far as that goes. Um, I want to say, okay, thank you, Kira, for that. I appreciate that. That's what we're here for. Kira said, thank you so much for making this dialogue. Look forward to following and watching again soon. Yep, we are going to keep moving with this. We got several topics that we want to cover. And of course, PTSD being such a big topic, we had it separated in two categories. I want to open up the floor. If anyone has any kind of questions or anything like that, go ahead and shoot them out there about PTSD. No question. Not Let me rephrase that. Any kind of question, don't worry about it. If it's always been on your mind, if it's veteran related, if it's civilian related, go out there and ask. This is the place to do that. Um, and while those are coming in, we're just going to keep moving on. Um, so vicarious trauma, again, it I can't say it enough, and I kind of sound like a broken record, but that's just because how important it is. It does not, PTSD does not affect just one person, you know, and it kind of goes along with suicide. Someone who kills themselves does not affect just that person, but affects a lot of people. And that is why we stress the importance of getting that help. And in fact, in our next stream, we're going to cover how to counselor shop. I have a lot of folks who say, Matt, I can't stand this counselor that I'm seeing or this psychologist, and I'm stuck with them. I'm like, no, you're not. You're not stuck with them. So what we're going to do in the next stream, because it's important, is how to get out there and how to find the right counselor for you, and how to get that good rapport that is important to making change. Um, Thank you, Knight. I appreciate you for dropping that link in there. Uh, um, Miss Eliza, so we're kind of getting close to starting to wrap things up for this topic. What are some of your thoughts as far as? Because I've always been curious, how um, it affects the classroom setting because you deal with a unique population. How can you expand a little bit more on that?
Well, it's just like with the family, everybody kind of feels. And I think that when one student comes in with rip roaring, angry, upset, it's sort of like a domino effect. I mean, it kind of populates throughout the whole classroom, especially behavior room, emotionally disturbed students. And it's also for attention too. A lot of them do it just strictly for attention, and it kind of goes through the whole room. And it's like, okay, hold on tight, here we go. And you're just out there trying to give them an attention sometimes rather than avoid problems or whatever. But it's definitely real. And there's specific protocols that we have to put in place, again, with the behavior support plans that go along with their individual education plans. And they work together at the same time. We also write supports in the IEP to assist the student, like if they just need to go outside and ground or take a 5-minute walk, just to get away if they're getting upset. I think anybody who doesn't have necessarily all the way extreme PTSD should have their own plan in place when they get upset.
Yeah, absolutely. Kind of like, plan A, plan B, depending on what's going on. And I want to kind of touch bases on the anger thing. A lot of veterans says, I got anger issues, or, I really blow up. I'm very volatile when I get angry. There's a couple ways to look at anger. Okay. And I'm going to get kind of generic here in a sense. Now, I've seen veterans who, have all these cool patches. Now, I've looked at some of the patches, and some of them said medicated for your benefit, or medicated for your safety, or back off, I'm a veteran, and all this other stuff. Um, I kind of joke with them. I says, well, why do you have those patches on you? Are you really that angry? And he says, yeah, I'm really pissed off all the time. And I says, is it really that you're pissed off, or is that in itself a defense mechanism? Because think about it for a minute. When you are advertising on your body that you are this disgruntled person, or you're angry all the time, what kind of message are you sending to the general population? It's to stay away from you. Stay away from me. It's not because they're necessarily really that angry all the time, but it's because they do not want to engage. Again, if you are isolating when you're walking down the street because you had to, well, it's like a shield. It's a shield that prevents you from, uh, engaging with other people. And so anger can be used in several different ways when it comes to that stuff. Um, okay,
Well, and the biggest thing I wanted to point out too was the whole thing about family and how it affects the vicarious thing, and in terms of raising awareness. If individuals are stubborn about getting help, maybe if they don't want to get help for themselves, maybe do it for their family, because their families are.
mhm, absolutely. And yeah, you got to take in consideration the families. Um, think about it in this way, okay? If this maybe might help drive the point home. If you have a family member who is affected by PTSD, it does not affect, again, not just one person, but generations. Okay, think about it this way. So the person who's had traumatic experiences, it's going to influence that child, and it's going to influence how that child rears their children, and so again, it has a generational effect. And so if that person could see, in the future, if I don't change my behaviors, if I don't change the way I react or interact with my family or my loved ones, this is going to have a generational effect, and that creates a lot of issues with the family. You hear those examples of family members who have issues with interacting with each other. They don't talk about the problems that are happening. They just kind of blow it off and say, out of sight, out of mind. And that's not really a healthy way of dealing with problems. So, yeah, think about it. So, resources that are out there. I didn't make a slide about this, but I want to let you guys know that, again, there's a lot of resources available. If you are a veteran, of course, there's the VA Medical Center. There is the vet centers out there. If you're a civilian, There's, of course, the agencies. There are universities that have a mental health program who more than likely can do it for free, and help you out with, getting the assistance that you need, to move on, to again not survive but thrive. That's where we want to get you back to. So I want to go ahead and do a recap of everything that we covered today. First thing that we covered, of course, was who can get PTSD. Uh, Miss Eliza, who can get PTSD?
Anybody?
That's right, anybody.
Everybody? Anybody?
That's right. It's not as specific to just the military folks. It's
And did you
anybody.
really go over and crunch those stats on the different veterans and their war era rates? Who gets it the most? Did
Oh,
you
I
go through
did.
that?
I did. And again, it was one of those slides that didn't get pulled up. Okay, so here
Uh,
I'm gonna backtrack a little bit, and thank you for bringing that up. So let's see if I can remember off the top of my head. Okay, so we got OIF, OEF veterans. At the percentage of them who experiencing PTSD, estimated was, I believe, 17 to 20%. Okay, out of every 100 service members. All right, so then we have the Gulf War veterans. I want to be accurate, so hold on one second. I'm going to pull it up. Okay, here we go. Sorry about that. All right, so, okay, OIF, OEF veterans, about 11 to 20% out of every 100 veterans, so again, 11 to 20% who served have PTSD in a given year, okay? Gulf War veterans, when we're talking about Desert Storm, about 12 out of every 100 Gulf War veterans, or 12%, have PTSD in a given year. And now we have Vietnam War. About 15 out of every 100 Vietnam veterans, or 15%, are currently diagnosed with PTSD. Okay, so those are some big numbers. It seems kind of low, but if you think about how many millions of people were deployed to each of these conflicts, that's a large number. Okay?
maybe you can answer something for me because it says in a given year, but I think that you said, correct me if I'm wrong, that PTSD is never really cured.
Right, and this is kind of a hot topic in the mental health community. There are some people out there who says yes, you can be completely cured of PTSD. Some people say no. Okay, it really depends on your philosophy. I guess that's a better way to put it. I, for one, as my thoughts are, is kind of a blend of my knowledge of the plasticity of the brain, but at the same time the effects of PTSD. So obviously PTSD and
Well, what do you mean by plasticity of the brain? So, just what does that mean?
oh, this is the way the brain works. This is how the brain
Okay,
will
just how it
to
functions.
function. Um,
Okay.
so we've got um, PTSD is a memory. For lack of better words, PTSD in some sense is a memory stored in your brain. It's a neural synapse, okay? So if that neural synapse is still in the brain, and I'm trying to get this as really simple as possible. If that is sitting there in your brain and it's still there even after 20 years, why would you think PTSD would just automatically go away? You have to work at it. And it doesn't just get cured, because I firmly believe that, if we could do brain mapping, i.e., find that specific neuron or whatever that's firing, that's creating that memory, and maybe erase it. I don't know if that's ethical, but if you can't do that, how can you cure someone of PTSD? Because I've had veterans who come into my office and said, "Man, my last psychologist said that he thinks I'm faking it." you know and he thinks that there is no such thing as PTSD. Yes, there are people out there who are like that. and
All the
and
more reason to find another counselor.
right, counselor shop, that's going to be the next stream for sure. Um, and, and it's an unfortunate situation. I don't agree with that, and I'll stake my professional license on that. When people say PTSD is not a thing, and I say bullshit, it is very much a thing. Look at all the millions of people who are affected by it, and to deny them and to completely overlook their trauma is not doing a service to the mental health community. You need to be able. You have to acknowledge what's going on, And denying it is not going to help. It's not going to make it go away on its own, just like PTSD. You can't ignore it. You can't just say, I'm going to go through the next 20 years of my life never giving it any thought, never giving an investment of going to see a counselor and hope that it's just going to go away on its own. It doesn't work that way, guys and gals. You have to invest time. It's just like anything. If your body, if you have a broken bone, if you have a cut arm, you have to get help. PTSD is just the same way.
Nightmare Actual made a good point that, there's always going to be that one trigger. Now, what were you calling that? We were talking about that a while ago, and about like how, like, when you get these triggers, and I don't know. Does that make sense?
Could you
Like when
expand
it
on that?
happens further, when it happens further down the road, and all these things kind of sneak up on you, and you're least expecting it.
You're right. Okay, so hopefully I'm understanding what you're saying is like how 20 years down the road it really starts to hit them hard. Is that what you're saying?
Well, just when it sneaks up out of the blue, and they aren't expecting it. It's like pow. These flashbacks come back, and they can
Yeah.
be really annoying.
Okay, so I'll give you kind of a spiel about this. The VA did a really intensive study, and they decided to call it PTSD ageism. I think that's what it's called. Anyhow, they started to notice that the Vietnam era veterans would come home from the war, and those who could would go straight back to the workforce, or they go into college and then they go back into the workforce. And during those 20, 30 years of working, they really never had an issue with PTSD, so they say. And they said, I never had an issue. I didn't really have nightmares. It wasn't until I retired from my job that I really started to have these problems. And so the VA decided to investigate. They're like, well, what's going on here? Why are these veterans having what seems to be a pretty healthy life or meaningful life thus far? And they start to retire, and it starts to kind of all mount up. And for a lack of for basically what the VA was trying to say in this study was that they were able to suppress, for the most part. It wasn't 100%. They still had nightmares. They still had some issues with PTSD because, again, it's kind of like if you were to take Play-Doh and stick it in your hand and squeeze it, it kind of pours itself through the cracks somehow. They were able to suppress it for a while, but when left with nothing else in terms of keeping themselves busy, they had a stare down with PTSD. They're saying they had no other options anymore. They're saying now you will have to deal with this. You can no longer working. Now everything that you tried to forget for the last 20 or 30 years, the triggers, the nightmares, the hypervigilance, now it's going to come. And so that's why I always urge people say, hey, get the help. Get the help immediately. Because you don't want all this crap waiting for you when you retire. I mean, hell, screw that. You spent 30 years working, busting your butt. Why would you want to spend the last 10, 20 years of your life dealing with this stuff when you could be dealing with it earlier? You know?
And why does that happen? Why is there that latent effect, or that, you know, after the fact kind of effect?
Well, PTSD doesn't manifest right off the bat. Usually there's a delay response. Usually some people say it's in a couple of months, some people up to 6 months. It really all depends. Uh, Again, it really depends on the individual. It's hard for me to generalize that because everyone's different when it comes to reacting towards
Mm-hmm.
the traumatic events. Someone can suppress it for 20 years and have very little issues with it, going back to that study that the VA did. And some folks, it hits them, boom, within a few months of coming home from the war, or from that car crash, or from that sexual assault. You know, it just kind of depends on how that person's brain reacts towards the memory, the trauma.
Well, when you're going through a really hardcore situation, I don't think you realize when you're going through it until you're actually safe and in the comforts of whatever environment you're used to, when those symptoms finally start dropping bombs, I guess, and,
Yeah.
hitting you.
Nightmare brings up a good thing. Something can always be a trigger, no matter how many years you've been without incident, consciously or subconsciously. But then something happens, direct or indirectly, and it all comes back. Yes, absolutely. That's exactly what we're trying to say. Um, Again, you know, you can either deal with it now or you deal with it later. And again, I always try to urge people, says, don't wait until you're in crisis mode. Don't wait until you're about to lose your next job, or your next relationship with a person. Come in and
Or
get
your
the help.
anniversary date.
Or your anniversary date. Yeah, there you go. There's lots of help and lots of resources out there. So, okay, so let's go ahead and let's talk about what we covered. We covered the different types of ways PTSD will affect a person. We talked about nightmares, flashbacks, talked about emotional, physical reactivities. We also talked about isolation and how important it is to be socially engaged with people. Uh, we also talked about hypervigilance. We added the examples. We talked about how our brain is trying its hardest to keep us safe, and that's the reason why we have that reactivity towards being in heavily populated areas. And then, of course, we talked about vicarious trauma, secondary PTSD, sub PTSD. Well, we didn't talk about sub PTSD, but we talked about how PTSD can affect the entire family or your support system. And I think we really let me see what nightmares you talked about. Me, oh yeah, nightmare. Uh, we talked about these, and we also talked about the importance of getting that help. I really, I see it all the time. I saw it all the time when I was a counselor. Get out there and get the help. Overcome that stigma, that obstacle. We talked about how MST how prevalent it is in the military, how much it affects women, how much it affects men. This is all in the same pot, folks. This is all in the same melting pot of issues.
Hey,
Being
didn't they have like specific counselors at all vet centers that specifically deal with military sexual trauma? Is
very
that
good
right?
point. Very good point. Thank you for bringing that up. Completely escaped me. Every vet center has been tasked by Congress to have at least one counselor there who is MST certified. And what do I mean by that? I mean they had to go through rigorous training, and they have to do an internship, like kind of like an internship, in order to be effectively treat and help those with military sexual trauma. Okay, so and that's how dedicated the vet centers were trying to help combat this issue, uh, because MST has the issue of PTSD on top of it. So not only is that service member dealing with the trauma of being sexually assaulted, but they're also working with PTSD as well. So thank you. I appreciate you bringing that up. So yes, uh, check out the vet centers, check out the VA resources. If you're a civilian, check out the local agencies, individual practices. There's help. There's lots of help out there. Um, so that's all I've got for today's stream. Our next stream is slated for the 24th. I'm excited because we're going to talk about how to counselor shop. I think that's kind of a hot topic. I had a lot of Stack Up members reach out to me in private DM saying, "Hey Matt, what do I do here? How do I get rid of this counselor?" Or are there veterans who are saying, "I'm stuck with this person"? I'm like, "No, you're not. No, you can get the help that you need." Any closing comments that you have, Miss Eliza?
Mm, I can't think of anything. I think we really beat that one.
All right.
Yeah.
There you go. Again, folks, I really appreciate you guys tuning in today. I'm sorry for us getting a late start. Technical difficulties, what can you do about it, right? Just got to deal with it. Just got to move on. Our next stream is going to be on the 24th. I will try to be sure to have it heavily promoted because I think it's going to be another useful tool for those who watch. Because again, this is all education, and um, if you guys have any kind of topics that you think that would be useful, please, please, please let me know. I'm so happy to get the feedback. If you see something that you want to be have included in the streams, let me know. I'm so happy to try and put that in there. And of course, I'm going to shamelessly plug in my own personal stream. So if you I do stream on my own page. If you haven't liked it, please do. And that is it. That's all we have for the day. And again, I appreciate your time. You guys have a great weekend,
Thank you.
and we'll see you in a couple of weeks.